The Kremlin has tasked a top commander of the Wagner mercenary group with setting up volunteer units to fight in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin today met with former senior officer Andrei Troshev, who played a leading role in the Wagner group. Now, this comes a month after the mysterious death of former Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, who led, as you may remember, a short-lived mutiny against Moscow. The military draft has been very unpopular in Russia. Any increase in the number of Wagner mercenaries on the ground, particularly in Ukraine, could ease pressure on conscripts. All right, I want to pull in now Sean McFate. He's an expert on foreign policy and mercenary groups with the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. Sean, it's good to have you with us. Where does the Wagner Group actually stand right now after Prigozhin's death? I mean, is it still intact? Now, all of a sudden, we're talking about a new commander.
The Wagner Group is still intact, but it's scattered and in disarray. And the mission of Troshev is to command it, but directly for Putin on a very short leash. And that's what Troshev is going to try to do. But what he can do is another question.
So what can he do?
Well, the Wagner Group is split actually into two groups. There's an old guard and new guard. Now, the new guard are all those ex-convicts dumped out of Russian jails a year ago and sent to fight in Ukraine as if it's Stalingrad. And that's the easy part. Troshev, those new guard have been absorbed into the Russian military, and Troshev is going to be their commander, and he's going to be sitting in the Ministry of Defense as a contractor, and there's not much those guys can do. They're basically cannon fodder. But the old guard, which are higher quality mercenaries, are in Africa. That's where Prigozhin always kept his best mercenaries. And they're kind of out of reach. So because even if Moscow can reach them in Mali or Sudan or Burkina Faso, they can just disappear into the Congo and become freelance mercenaries. So there's a big question about the old guard.
That's interesting that you say that. So they could basically disappear and be out of reach from any authorities back in Moscow, if I'm understanding you correctly. What does that tell us then about the role of Wagner as we understood it under Prigozhin? Is there the possibility that we will see a resurrection of Wagner to the status that it once had?
I don't know about that. What I do think is going to happen is that Troshev is really going to take over the Wagner Group guys who are in Ukraine, the cannon fodder, and they're easy. They're essentially serfs or slaves to the Russian military at this point. But, you know, Putin used the Wagner Group since 2014 to today as a sort of a fifth column in Africa to spread Russian influence, because Wagner and like all mercenaries has plausible deniability, and he uses that to manipulate for coups and to do other things. What the future of that is remains unknown. Troshev met also yesterday with Putin, also with Deputy Defense Minister Yevgeny, who was at the same meeting. Yevgeny went around to Africa, to all of those places Wagner is working, to try to talk to the heads of state there to sort of reassure them that Prigozhin's out, but we're still in control. We don't know how successful he was. I suspect he wasn't entirely successful because Prigozhin's relationship with African countries was strictly on a bilateral, personal level. You can't replace it with an empty suit from the Kremlin.
Sean McFate with the National Defense University in Washington, D.C., with the latest on the Wagner Group. It's like a thriller novel to find out what the next step will be. Sean, thank you.
Thank you.